Have you ever noticed how exhausted you are? Exhausted from pretending, from performing, from constantly measuring yourself against everyone else. Maybe you don't consciously realize it, but there is a kind of silent depletion that comes precisely from the constant attempt to appear flawless. You pressure yourself all the time to be more successful, more beautiful, more accomplished. You force yourself to hide your struggles, to construct the perfect image, to maintain a narrative about yourself that bears almost no resemblance to the truth. And the more you perform, the more it seems that real connection slips through your fingers and your authentic self disappears. But there is another way. It starts with one word: vulnerability. Not weakness, not self-destruction, not oversharing on the internet, but vulnerability, the most misunderstood word in modern language. And it is in fact one of the most profound expressions of courage. It is the willingness to show up when you can't control the outcome, to let people see you when you're not sure you're enough, to speak your truth even when your voice shakes. Think of it as someone finally admitting failure after years of false success. Like a person saying, "I need help," instead of drowning silently. Like a leader revealing doubt instead of performing certainty. Now stop and ask yourself, how many times a day do you hide a part of yourself? How many times do you blame yourself for not measuring up to an image that isn't even real? How many moments have you missed with people you love because you were too busy managing their perception of you? The truth is that we have been trained to believe that perfection is the path to belonging. Since we were small, we were taught that if we were good enough, successful enough, looked the right way, we would finally be safe. And so we become anxious, insecure adults, disconnected from ourselves and from others, because we were never taught the art of imperfection, of honest struggle, of authentic connection. Vulnerability is not self-destruction. It is the gateway. It is the only path through which real love, real belonging, real purpose can enter. Brené Brown has spent decades researching exactly this. And what she discovered may shake everything you think you know about strength. To understand the true essence of vulnerability as courage, we must move beyond what we've been conditioned to believe. We must dive into the research that reveals a truth about human connection that our culture has been trying to hide. Forget for a moment the way you have been taught to understand strength as invulnerability, as independence, as never needing anyone. Vulnerability and courage are not opposites. They are inseparable. They are not concepts you understand with your mind alone. They are realities you feel in your body, in your relationships, in the moments when everything in you is screaming to stay hidden, but you choose to show up anyway. Brené Brown, a researcher who spent over a decade studying shame, courage, and human connection, arrived at a conclusion that contradicts everything our culture teaches. The people who live with the greatest sense of wholehearted presence, the people who genuinely belong, are not the ones with the fewest struggles. They are the ones willing to be seen while struggling. They are the ones brave enough to say, "This is who I am. Take it or leave it." They are the ones who understand a simple but revolutionary truth. Connection requires vulnerability. What Brown discovered in her research is that we all experience shame. We all have moments of profound self-doubt. We all carry stories about not being enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not successful enough, not loving enough. The difference between people who live in scarcity, perpetually comparing and competing, and people who live in abundance, connected to themselves and others, is this: some people believe the shame. Some people build entire lives around hiding it. But others, a smaller group, they face the shame. They speak it. They let trusted people know their struggle. And in that vulnerability, they discover something unexpected. They discover they were never alone. Shame, Brown teaches, thrives in silence and secrecy. The moment you speak it aloud, the moment you tell someone about your failure, your fear, your imperfection, shame loses its power. This is not psychology you can verify through logic. This is truth you verify through courage. You verify it by taking the risk. You verify it by showing up imperfectly in front of someone who matters and discovering that you are still worthy of love. That is the revolutionary act that our comparison-obsessed culture is desperately trying to prevent. Imagine a time when the culture of perfectionism was at its absolute peak, when social media was amplifying comparison to unprecedented levels, when the pressure to appear flawless had never been more intense or more toxic. It was in this era that Brené Brown emerged not as a self-help guru dispensing easy answers, but as a rigorous researcher willing to ask uncomfortable questions about shame, vulnerability, and what it actually takes to live a wholehearted life. Brown was not a distant academic theorizing from an ivory tower. She was a woman who had experienced her own profound failure, her own breakdown, her own moment of having to choose between continuing the performance or finally being honest. And from that personal reckoning came her life's work, proving through research what we intuitively know but are terrified to admit, that our obsession with perfection is destroying us from within. She understood that the greatest obstacle to living authentically was not lack of willpower. It was fear. The fear that if we let people see our imperfections, we will be rejected. The fear that admitting struggle is the same as admitting weakness. The fear that vulnerability is dangerous. Brown did not seek to convince people intellectually. She wanted to liberate them, to liberate from the tyranny of perfectionism, the scarcity mindset that says there isn't enough success to go around so you must compete, the shame cycle that keeps you isolated. Her mission was to reveal that what we endlessly seek, belonging, purpose, authentic connection, is not in the heroic effort to construct the perfect image, but in the quiet courage to let yourself be fully seen, flaws included. She did this with radical honesty. There was no performance of certainty in her work, but rather the authenticity of someone speaking from hard-won understanding. Brené Brown did not offer us perfect formulas. She tore apart the myths, challenged the false narratives, invited us to question our deepest assumptions about what it means to have value. She knew that vulnerability could not be explained logically or overcome through willpower. So she told stories. She shared her own struggles. She used simple and powerful truths, like shame lives in silence, or the opposite of scarcity is not abundance but enoughness, to bring us the wisdom that human connection itself had always been trying to teach us. She said that we are dying from a lack of belonging. And that is true. And that belonging requires us to show up imperfectly in front of people who matter. Brené Brown challenged an entire generation to reconsider their deepest beliefs about what it means to be worthy, what it means to be strong, and what it truly means to live well. She knew that as long as we continued performing perfection, we would be inevitably doomed to loneliness. Her voice echoes to this day because she did not speak only of research and data. She spoke of the invisible wounds we all carry from years of hiding, of the modern epidemic of disconnection, of the way comparison has become a weapon we use against ourselves. But Brown also knew that merely understanding intellectually is not enough. Knowing about vulnerability is useless if you continue to perform and hide in practice. And that is exactly what we will explore next. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a person standing in front of a mirror. Day after day, they construct an image. They filter their life through the lens of how others will perceive it. They curate their existence. They present only the winning moments, the polished version, the highlight reel. And they work tirelessly, ceaselessly, to maintain this fiction. Every morning they prepare the mask. Every interaction they monitor it, adjust it, make sure it stays in place. The body grows tense. The mind becomes hypervigilant. The spirit withers because nobody sees the real person underneath. Just the performance. This image is exactly what Brené Brown uses to describe the life organized around perfectionism and comparison. The metaphor of the mask is not just poetic. It is painfully true. It reveals that the suffering we experience in modern life is rarely caused by actual failure. Almost always suffering arises from the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be. You make a mistake at work, and instead of admitting it and learning from it, you spin a story, you cover it up, you construct an explanation that protects the perfect image. You struggle with your body or your finances or your relationships, and instead of reaching out, you isolate. You feel unworthy, and instead of examining why, you achieve more, earn more, accomplish more, as if enough external success can finally make the internal emptiness disappear. And while you're doing all this performing, something essential is happening. Real people, people who might actually care about the real you, are being kept at arm's length. Relationships remain superficial because they're not based on truth. And you live in a constant state of terror that someone will discover the gap between the mask and the reality. Brown explains that this is the mechanics of shame. Shame is not about what we've done. Shame is about who we believe we are. And when we organize our entire lives around preventing others from discovering our fatal flaw, we hand shame all the power. We give it permission to run our lives. The suffering that comes from this is not about external circumstances. You can be successful and still miserable because you don't believe you deserve it. You can have relationships and still be profoundly lonely because they're not based on being truly seen. You can have accomplishments and still feel empty because they're built on the foundation of proving something rather than expressing something. When you live behind the mask, you create an internal war. The real self is always fighting against the performed self. The authentic impulses are always being suppressed by the need to maintain the image. The result is predictable. Chronic anxiety, depression, a sense of fraudulence, the crushing awareness that if people really knew you, they would leave. And the cruelest part is that on some level you know this is unsustainable. But the fear of being seen as you actually are is even greater than the fear of continuing to suffer. But here is what the mask metaphor carries with it that many people miss. A silent promise that there is another way to live, a way that does not require constant performance, a way in which by removing the mask, you don't become worthless. You become real. And real is infinitely more valuable than perfect. When you finally stop performing, you discover something unexpected. You discover that the people worth having in your life actually prefer the real version of you. You discover that your struggles, your failures, your imperfections are the very things that make you human and worthy of love. You discover that vulnerability is not a liability. It is currency. It is how trust is built. It is how belonging actually works. But for that, courage is needed. Courage to let yourself be seen. Courage to risk rejection. Courage to value authenticity over acceptance. And this courage to be vulnerable is not just a nice idea. It is an urgent necessity in a world that is literally killing us with comparison, with perfectionism, with the constant demand to be something other than what we are. And this is precisely what we must understand next. How our culture has constructed an invisible prison of perfectionism and comparison, and how this system is silently destroying us from within. You have been trained to believe that your worth is determined by your performance. Since childhood, you have heard phrases like, be the best. That's not good enough. What will people think? You need to stand out. You grew up believing that if you were just successful enough, attractive enough, smart enough, you would finally belong, finally be safe, finally be worthy of love. You probably didn't realize it, but this belief has created an invisible prison within you. A prison of constant comparison, of scarcity, of the belief that there isn't enough success, enough beauty, enough love to go around. So you must compete, you must perform, you must be better than everyone around you. Brené Brown saw this clearly. She understood that the West, by idolizing perfection and achievement, has created a culture of comparison where people are perpetually measuring themselves against impossible standards, where every moment of struggle is viewed with shame, as if admitting difficulty were evidence of failure, a weakness to be hidden. We live in societies that glorify the highlight reel, excess productivity, the curated self. Social media didn't create this dynamic, but it amplified it to a level of toxicity that is genuinely unprecedented. Now you can compare yourself not just to your neighbors or your colleagues, but to thousands of people, all performing their best selves simultaneously. Life turns into an endless competition to prove your worth through external markers. And in this insane quest for perfection, you drift further and further away from yourself. You lose touch with what actually matters. You become a stranger within your own existence, performing for an audience that may not even be paying attention. Have you ever felt that sensation of achieving everything you thought you wanted, looking perfect on paper, and yet carrying an unbearable emptiness? Have you ever succeeded and felt like a fraud? Have you ever realized that you were working toward goals that weren't even yours, that you'd inherited them from parents or culture or fear? That something essential was missing. It is, and that something is connection. Real connection. The kind that requires being seen, being known, being accepted despite your flaws. But the mind conditioned by perfectionism does not accept this reality. It fears the exposure, the criticism, the judgment. It wants certainty. And for that it builds suffocating personas, rigid standards, strategies that try to eliminate all risk of being discovered as not enough. Yet imperfection is an inescapable part of being human. Struggle is part of being alive. By trying to eliminate all evidence of our humanity, we also eliminate the empathy, the genuine connection, the authentic relationships that make life worth living. Brené Brown warns, when we stop trying to be everything to everyone, we can be everything to someone who matters. When we stop performing, we can finally start connecting. But our culture does not support this. Our culture is built on comparison. It has created a system where you must constantly measure yourself against others, where you must curate, edit, and perform. And the irony is that we do all this to avoid shame, to avoid being rejected or judged. But in trying to prevent shame, we guarantee it. Because when you organize your entire life around hiding, you're essentially saying, if you knew the real me, you'd reject me. You're already judging yourself before anyone else gets the chance. You're already confirming the very narrative you're trying to prevent. The system is a trap, but there is a way out. Talking about vulnerability may sound inspiring in theory, but how to live vulnerably in a world that demands perfection? How to practice authenticity while being bombarded daily by comparison, judgment, and the expectation to perform? How to choose courage over comfort? That is the real question. And the answer is not simple. It requires radical honesty. It requires, above all, a profound shift in perspective about what it means to be strong and what it truly means to live well. Practicing vulnerability in the modern world is not about trauma dumping, oversharing, or being reckless with your personal information. That is the mistake many make when they hear about authenticity, confusing it with indiscriminate exposure or weakness. Vulnerability, Brown teaches, is about choosing to be open and honest with the right people, the people who have earned the right to hear your story in the right way and for the right reasons. It is about acting from a place of courage, not from desperation or resignation. In practice, vulnerability begins with a gesture of honesty. It begins with recognizing that you cannot control how others perceive you, that your worth is not determined by their approval, and that your true power lies not in performing perfection, but in being courageously, unapologetically human. This requires slowing down. It requires naming your struggles out loud instead of pretending everything is fine. It requires choosing presence over performance, truth over likability. In daily life, vulnerability is admitting when you don't know something at work instead of pretending you have all the answers. It is saying to someone you love, I was wrong. I'm sorry. It is being honest about your fears instead of overcompensating with bravado. It is the courage to fail in front of people and trust that failure doesn't make you unworthy. It is silencing the constant inner critic that measures and judges and instead listening to the voice of self-compassion. Vulnerability also manifests in the ability to ask for help. Our culture teaches independence as a virtue, but Brené Brown reminds us that asking for support is not weakness. It is wisdom. There are moments when you need to rely on others, moments when you are not capable of doing everything alone, moments when admitting limitation is the most powerful thing you can do. But our culture obsessed with individualism makes us believe that meeting anyone is failing. It makes us perform sufficiency. And in doing so, we isolate ourselves from the very thing we most need, genuine connection. Practicing vulnerability in the modern world is therefore an act of conscious rebellion. It is refusing the cultural narrative that says you must be flawless. It is choosing authenticity over likability. It is reversing the logic of scarcity, which says that there isn't enough belonging to go around, that you must earn your place through achievement, that admitting struggle makes you less worthy, and reconnecting with the truth that your inherent worth has nothing to do with your productivity or appearance or performance. But living this way requires vigilance, because the old programming, the voice of perfectionism, the fear of judgment will try to pull you back all the time. When you're vulnerable and someone responds with criticism, that old part of you will say, "See, I told you. You shouldn't have let them see." And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can retreat into the mask, or you can remember what you've learned about courage. You can recognize that one person's inability to handle your authenticity says nothing about your worth. You can choose the narrow group of people who actually deserve access to your real self. This choice, at its core, is the beginning of a radical transformation. It is exactly about this transformation that we will talk next. The moment when you finally stop performing and everything in your life begins to change. There comes a moment in life when you need to make a fundamental choice. Either you keep performing, competing, hiding until your body and soul are exhausted, or you finally decide to be real. Understanding that your life is not a stage for performance, but a journey of becoming, of connecting, of matching to the people who matter to you. Brené Brown discovered in her research that the paradox of wholehearted living is this. It happens not when you finally become perfect, but when you stop requiring perfection as the price of admission. When you stop performing, you create space. Space for real relationships to develop. Space for people to know you and love you anyway. Space for you to stop exhausting yourself and actually connect with the life you've been too busy trying to prove. True courage is not the absence of fear. True courage is the willingness to act despite the fear. True vulnerability is not self-destruction. True vulnerability is letting people see you while you're still figuring things out, while you're scared, while you're failing, while you're becoming. And this, of course, requires practice. It requires internal vigilance. It requires the courage to face the old impulses that in moments of fear will try to drag you back into the performance. You will be tested. Someone will criticize you and you'll want to defend, to explain, to perform your way out of discomfort. Someone will succeed and you'll feel the old sting of comparison creeping in. You will have a failure and the voice of shame will whisper, "You're not enough." But now you have a choice. Because you understand. You understand that vulnerability is how humans actually connect. You understand that comparison is a thief that steals your peace. You understand that the version of yourself you're afraid to show is actually the most valuable version, the most real, the most capable of genuine belonging. This is where the real freedom begins. Not the freedom to do whatever you want without consequence, but the freedom to be fully yourself without apology. The freedom to speak your truth even when your voice shakes. The freedom to fail without believing it means you are a failure. The freedom to let people leave if they can't handle your authenticity, knowing that their leaving makes room for people who can. This is freedom, and it's waiting on the other side of the courage you muster every single time you choose vulnerability over performance. So before you leave this video, I want to propose something to you. Stop for a moment and observe. What is the area of your life where you are performing the most today? Where are you constructing an image because you're afraid of being judged? Where are you hiding a part of yourself because you believe it will make you unworthy? Comment down below. Share with me and with the community. Where is your armor the thickest right now? Sometimes just naming it is already a giant step toward freedom. Sometimes just admitting, "I've been hiding," is the first act of courage. And if this message resonated with you, if somewhere deep inside something awakened, don't stop here. Because vulnerability is not a destination. It's a practice. It's a daily choice to let yourself be seen despite the fear. The next video is an important continuation of this journey. It's not just more content. It's an essential piece for you to understand how to move from knowing about vulnerability to actually practicing it. How to build shame resilience. How to find your people. The ones who will handle your real self with care. Keep watching because the transformation you seek, the belonging you crave, the real version of yourself that's been waiting to emerge, that's all waiting on the other side of the courage you're about to practice. See you there.